The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Toll-free worldwide, 1-800-610-7035. Email xzone at xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv at hotmail.com. And our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. I have the following hurricane update on Hurricane Irene that the newsroom has asked me to pass to you, the members of the X Zone Nation. Hurricane Irene continues to churn toward the U.S. East Coast, and all indications are that this storm will be, as President Obama said, historic. Here are some of the events that weather experts say could develop over the next 48 hours. Irene is bringing gusty winds, heavy rain, and dangerous surf to the South Carolina coast today. North Carolina will be pounded by Irene's force Friday night and Saturday. Irene will head north Sunday, hitting a large swath from Virginia to Maine. Major metro areas of Philadelphia, New York, and Boston should brace for possible widespread damage, including major flooding as Irene hits Sunday. The strongest of Irene's power will be to the east of its center. Widespread power outages are expected over a large section of the Northeast. New York's Metro Transit system will shut down X Zone Nation at noon on Saturday, and East Coast travel will be severely disrupted starting tonight. Hundreds of flights and Amtrak trains have already been canceled. For more information, you can check out your local broadcast website. And in a time of emergency, according to the people of FEMA, tune your radio to a local radio station where local authorities will be able to give you instructions pertaining to Hurricane Irene. Once again, that is from the X Zone Newsroom. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Scotty Roberts. We're going to be talking to Scotty about his new book that comes out in February, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. The untold story of fallen angels, giants on the earth, and their extraterrestrial origins. Scott is the founder and executive director of Intrepid Magazine, a journal dedicated to politics, science, and unexplained phenomena. And we're very happy to have Scott with us today. And Scott, welcome to the X Zone.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob. I appreciate it.
You've got your new book that we were talking about briefly, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, coming out this February through New Page Books. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it is a book that is not original in its content. You can go out there in the bookstores and on the internet and find all kinds of things that have been written about the Nephilim. And this is just my take on it. I could have written a book that was a heavy-duty, reference material type of book, which I opted for, I could have written a book that had more opinion in it, that had more telling the tale of what it's about, mixed in with a lot of the resource material and reference material. There's some etymology of ancient Hebrew and words like that, and
Sure.
sort of dig into it a little deeper in that sense. But it's a book I think that will offer up reference and at the same time be enjoyable to read. Of course, I'm the author, so I'm going to say that.
Sure.
But I just finished writing the book this last week, and it went off to the publisher. And so it's slated for a January or February release. I've heard both from the publisher, so I'm not sure which is which.
Scotty, stand by. You and I have to take a commercial break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. X Zone Nation. Our guest this hour is... Are you ready for this? Because I know you're going to want to go to your bookstore and ask for his book when it comes out in February. Scott Allen Roberts is our guest. The name of his book is The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. It is published by our good friends at New Page Books. Scott and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break in 2 minutes as we continue from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada on the Talkstar Radio Network, X-Zone Broadcast Network, UK High Definition Radio, Euro High Definition Radio, Star Cable, and our affiliates right around the world. We'll be back. Don't go away. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Exonation, Scott Allen Roberts is our guest this hour. We're talking about a new book that he has written. It's going to be coming out in February of 2012, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. The untold story of fallen angels, giants on the earth, and their extraterrestrial origins. His website is intrepidmag.com. Maybe for some of our listeners who may be new to what you and I are talking about, could you describe and tell them what the Nephilim are?
Sure. Now, most people living in the United States and Canada are in a Christianized type of nation, and in former years, most of us went to Sunday school, and we learned all those biblical stories that have become almost storybook stories. It's what they evolved to. Mm-hmm. And we all heard stories of Noah and the Ark. Of course, you know, God saying the wickedness of man, and he's going to destroy the earth and wipe it out with a flood, but Noah was the only righteous man left, and so he chooses Noah and all the animals and so on. Well, what is left out of that teaching, I went all the way through church as a kid. I went to Bible school. I went to seminary. I was in ministry. And in all of those years, never had any teaching about the preamble to the flood, which you find in Genesis chapter 6. And as I started looking into this, I found that every culture of the ancient world had its own version of this story, of a major flood that was brought on by the god or the gods that was in retaliation or in punishment for wickedness of some kind. And so when I started looking into this, it starts, and this is just quoting off the top of my head, I'm not reading it, so I'm paraphrasing a bit, but in Genesis chapter 6, it talks about, and the sons of God descended to the earth and intermingled with the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were known as the Nephilim.
Right.
And in the Genesis passage, they're called the heroes of old and the men of renown. And that's really all it says in Genesis, but that's one of the main source points for the word Nephilim, which has become very imbued with mythos of its own over the years. And you start going to some of the apocryphal books, like Enoch, which was a book that was booted out of the canon of Scripture, you know, back in the 300s during all these different councils of Nicaea and so on, invoked by Constantine, because there was argument over whether or not it was breathed of God. But you go to the book of Enoch, and you find the same identical passage with the same wording as you find in Genesis, except it's much longer and more detailed, talking about these sons of God, or as Enoch also refers to them as the Watchers, who came down, intermingled with human women, had children by them, which sounds like all kinds of mythology right there. Until you start looking at, well, the way I put it is this. There's no scientific methodology to it. You can't coax a son of God or a watcher or an angel, as some people define them, into a lab and take a human woman and say, all right, you two go at it. We want to see what happens. You can't apply that kind of scientific methodology. And, of course, I'm saying that a bit tongue-in-cheek. But what you can do is you look at the annals of history and you look at, there's at least 600 different tribal cultures of 4,000 to 6,000 years ago that have their versions of the flood story, and common to almost all of them is spirit beings or beings not of this earth that intermingled with human women, had children, and some deity or some higher power destroyed the earth because of it. And when you start parsing down the Hebrew language in Genesis chapter 6, and this is, believe it or not, it's really basic stuff. And when I'm writing about it in the book, how do you make the etymology of the ancient Hebrew language fun and exciting to read about? What's the passion behind that? So I try to approach it that way and tell the story and say there are certain words in here in the Hebrew that mean something. For instance, the name used for God in the Old Testament of the Bible almost 3,000 times is the Hebrew word Elohim. And the name for God was El, and Im was the plural ending. And I found that the name used almost 3,000 times was a plural reference to God. Now, some people will write this up as, it's the Trinity, God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Well, it doesn't say that.
No, well, even in the book of Genesis, it said, and God said, "Let us make man in our image." Yeah.
Now that's an English rendition of that, and that's the big problem we have when we read some of these scriptural stories in English, is that it's the people who translated those passages in some context, transliterated words to give you the English Bible. Now, so what you've got is the word Elohim, which is gone, and it's kind of similar to the word deer. You can say, I see a deer standing in my front yard, or there is a herd of deer over there in that pasture. Mm-hmm. It can be used plurally or singularly, depending on the context of all the words around it. So, for instance, if you go to the book of Psalms in the Old Testament, Psalm 82, you'll find it says in the English, and God came to the divine council and said, you are gods, you are princes of heaven. When you read it in the Hebrew, it says this. It says, and Elohim, singular, stood in the midst of the Elohim, plural, and called them gods, Elohim, and princes of heaven, the bright shining ones. And this is, in the book, what I've found is that this divine council is not, God is not as monotheistic as we think it is in Judeo-Christian teaching, because God had this council of the gods, but he was the supreme. It was almost like Zeus, the Olympians, and things like that.
And there is a lot of similarities to Greek mythology to Christianity.
Oh, there is. You go to the book of Job. Chronologically, it's the oldest book written in the Old Testament. And it's pre-Judaism, pre-Hebrew, probably post-flood. And, you got to get out of your mind the storybook pictures of the flood and all the teachings we've had. There's so much evidence that a flood took place and so much writing about it. There's no question a flood took place. Whether or not it was universal or it was localized is the big question. But all these cultures speak of the flood. So the book of Job was written sometime between the end of the flood and before Moses, so in that time period. But it says in there's that passage at the beginning where it says, and God was in the courts of heaven meeting with the divine council of the other gods, and the Satan, it's got an article in front of his name, so it's a title, the Satan came and accused Job. And God says, well, do whatever you want to him, just don't take his life. It has that same exact picture of picturing Zeus with the Olympians, and they're playing chess or games with the lives of humans. So you can see where mythologies start to cross over and where one draws from the other.
And, of course, mythology is so much older than Christianity is.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, you start getting, I only touch on this ever so lightly in my book, but if you start getting into the Indian, the Vedic, and you talk about the yugas, the 4 cycles, we're in the final cycle, and it says that every something like 8 million years, the universe destroys and recreates itself. And how many times have we been through this is the question. And you look at even writings like the fiction of J.R.R. Tolkien writing Lord of the Rings. He drew his material from all this kind of stuff, these ages of man, the ages of the elves, the ages of so on. This all comes out of that yuga cycle as a basis for his mythology that he created.
Now, when we call these Nephilim giants, are we talking about their physical size, or are we talking about the amount of power and the knowledge that they had?
There's a little bit of both. When the English Bible says, and there were giants on the earth in those days, that was a mistranslation of Nephilim. Nephilim comes from this word, the Hebrew word nephal, means to fall, to come down, to descend, to leave someplace. The im is that plural ending, just like on Elohim for God, making it plural. Nephilim is those who fell, those who came down, those who descended. And so what you've got with these characters are people that have come down to the earth, impregnated humans, which of course breeds in current day all the extraterrestrial type of mythology that goes. And I probably drifted way off your question because I can't remember what your question was. But this is something I also address in the book, is that there are trains of thought that label this as extraterrestrial. And I find that just like you have the Judeo-Christians or the conservative Christians that will gripe and complain about anybody who says anything like that or detracts from the Word of God, you've got the same thing from the ancient alien side of things, which a lot of them, as their leaping off point, I'm an atheist. I don't want to believe that it was God, so I have this. But the evidence for both sides is pretty extreme, and coming down and deciding which side of that coin you want to be on is, what you ultimately do with this story.
Interesting. How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, let's see. I started about 3+ years ago with an article that I wrote for Taps Para magazine on the Nephilim. And a couple of people said, you ought to write that as a book. And I explored it a bit. I had an agent, and I looked through, and I started writing, and then I shelved it and wrote it and shelved it. And it wasn't until, and it was kind of fast-tracked. Marie D. Jones is a very good friend of mine. She's written several books for the New Page, and she brought me into her publisher there and said, you ought to take a look at Scotty's proposal. And that was March 17th of this year. I submitted a proposal, and by April 1st, I had a contract to write this book and try to have it done by the end of July. And it took me until almost the end of August. So I had a couple of extensions in there, but it's something I've been thinking about for years. Yeah. I've been lecturing on this for years, and I'd started writing it, but it wasn't until, you get the contract, and as I've said rather tongue-in-cheek, writing a book is much less daunting than finishing a book.
All right, stand by, Scotty. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation, Scotty Roberts is our guest. We're talking about his new book that is coming out, hopefully, February of 2012, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, the untold story of fallen angels, giants on Earth, and their extraterrestrial origin. This is the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. Our special guest this hour is Scott Alan Roberts, www.intrepidmag.com. And we're talking about his new book that's coming out in February of next year by our friends at New Page Books. It's entitled The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, the untold story of fallen angels, giants on the earth, I should say, and their extraterrestrial origins. Is this where the giant in David and Goliath actually comes in? Was he a Nephilim?
That is what is said by most of your, say, your rabbinic school of scholars and your conservative Christian scholars. There's several references after the flood, which was supposed to be the thing that wiped them out. where it says there were remnants of the Nephilim. There was Goliath and his 3 brothers lived in Gath. And Goliath, I've heard many theories about that Goliath, was somebody who suffered from gigantism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just not so. He was a mighty warrior. You don't have many people that have that disease physically, that once they pass a certain age in their late teens, early 20s, that they can function like normal, like athletes or warriors. So, yes, Goliath was one of them. According to the biblical passage, he measured 6 cubits in a span, which is roughly, a cubit was roughly from your tip of your fingers to your elbow. So I suppose it all depends on who was doing the measuring.
Mm-hmm.
But he was right around on an average height about 9'3", what it says. And he had this huge, heavy-weighted coat of bronze and all of this. And he was a mighty warrior and known for being a warrior, and so were his brothers. So Goliath, yes. There's also a man called Anak, who in the book of Deuteronomy, I believe it is, it's where they invaded him, and they found, the Israelites invaded, and his bed was something like measured like 13.5 feet long. He was a giant man. Now, giants in the earth, there's a lot of mythology around giants, and you find that also in almost every other culture that's out there, major culture. And I was just looking at that the other day, as a matter of fact, touching that section up in my book. And you have Og, who is the king of Bashan, who is mentioned in during the time of the Israelite wandering. And Og, that's where you get the word ogre from. All the etymology of words and the evolution of words all come from something. And so he was considered to be also one of the Nephilim. And there are several Nephilim mentioned when Moses brings the children of Israel out of captivity and they make it to the promised land. They send out spies, and the spies come back and say, we can't go in there and fight and win against these people. They are the Nephilim, the children of Anak. And so they're mentioned several times, and I believe there's still a remnant of that today. And something I hit on in my book is the bloodlines. Now, I didn't get into any of there's a lot of writing about the Nephilim when you get into the Merovingian and the Grail bloodline and all of that. I didn't really want to get into that. That's a book all unto itself. But what you've got are, and I mentioned this in the book, is the Garden of Eden scenario, where you have Adam and Eve, and then the snake comes and
right.
Eve, gives her the fruit, and she gives to Adam, and all of a sudden, oh, we're naked. And God gets pissed off and curses everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened there, the context is sexual, and the ramifications are sexual. Because what happens is you have this snake character in the Bible. The Hebrew name for him was Nakosh, that means serpent. But the definition of that word is cunning, deceiving, trickster, bringer of illumination and knowledge.
So it might have been another person.
It was a person. It wasn't a snake at all. This is where and you got to pardon me on this because we don't have a lot of time to dig into it deeply, but you start looking into the ufologists, I call it the mythology, the mythos of the reptilians that have been on the earth for since the beginning. It links into that.
But if we just said that the snake was actually a person, how do you make this connection between reptilians?
Well, by person, I'm using person, put quotes around it. It's the character of the serpent. Whoever the serpent was, he was not a snake. He was something else.
But once again, if we're talking about the reptilians, there's never been any archaeological finds to corroborate any of the statements of the UFO community who come up with the reptilian theory.
All you have in history is the use of serpents and the use of snakes in many different cultures, many different religions, many different symbologies that are associated with worship and bloodlines.
Right.
So it's extrapolation, what I found most of it to be. And I even mention that in my book, is that some of this, I can't go quite that far and say, I believe this exists this way, but I wanted to present that data and say, this is a look at this. This is one theory that is put out for this. And what I did want to mention about this scenario in the garden is when I say it's sexual in context, what really happened in the garden, and you'll have to go with me on this, I can't give you all the research in this conversation, But what I found was this conclusion, is that the reptilian character, or the serpent character, had sex with Eve and fathered Cain. Cain and Abel being the two sons of Adam and Eve. And then it says, and Eve went and brought Adam in on the act, and she also conceived from Adam, and he fathered Abel. So she bore twins, which, by the way, every first family, just about every first family mentioned in creation stories and all the different mythologies of creation through all different religions have some kind of multiple birth in there somewhere from the first family.
How do we know that like the Bible's based on myth itself, so how can we take anything that's in the Bible as anything that really happened?
Well, this is the problem, and I address this in my book, is just as much mythology that stems from things written in the Bible, you have things written in the Bible that stem from much older mythologies. Even the stories of Jesus Christ himself come from archetypes that have all the same data. Born of a virgin, star-guided people to his birthplace. He had a ministry. He died in execution. Went to hell for 3 days and came back. And that's not even talking about Jesus. It's different gods that are before the time of Jesus.
All right, let me ask you this: what do you think the members of organized religions are going to say when your book comes out?
Well, I have said I'm going to have the Jews hate me, the Christians hate me, and the scientists hate me. Oh yeah, and the ancient alienists hate me. I think there's going to be lots of criticism because this topic generates its own controversy. Because it's not just a story about something that happened. You can tell the story of the Nephilim in 6 paragraphs, and you don't have to write a book about it. There's the story. When you start examining if there's any factual data behind it, or what is, even in the mythologies, what are the languages used? How do they compare to other mythologies? What's out there? What happened historically? That's when you will start raising controversy because everybody's got a different view.
All right, so let me ask you, what in your book can be proved to be true?
Well, I know for certain one section. I wrote a chapter on Moses, and the only reason I did that was to establish the fact that Moses is traditionally the author of the book of Genesis and the next 4 books in the Bible.
Yeah, we all know that.
It's very important to understand that he was an actual person and not this archetype in Christian or Judeo mythology. And so I go through the dating system. I date when he would have lived, and he lived, by the way, in a family of pharaohs that went from Tutmosis the first, Tutmosis the second, Tutmosis the third. Hatshepsut was in there. Amenhotep the second was the pharaoh of the Exodus by this dating system. And I go into all the things that he would have learned that first 40 years that he grew up in the palace of Egypt. And there's many stories out of the Mishnah, the Jewish traditional writings that have many, many stories of Moses in his first 40 years as a conquering general for the Pharaoh of Egypt and the things that he did. I actually come out in my book and I say, I don't know if anybody else has ever pointed this out, but I said in the final chapter or paragraph on the Moses chapter, I said, it occurred to me as I'm writing this that Moses was establishing himself as the Pharaoh god of Israel, just like he grew up in this family of Pharaoh gods in Egypt. And the person that would have been his rival for the throne, his stepbrother, adopted brother, would have been Tutmosis III, who brought 18th dynasty Egypt during the Middle Kingdom, right around the 1480s BCE. He brought Egypt to its golden pinnacle.
All right, so let me ask you this question. In today's society, why is all this information on the past that cannot be proved of any significance?
I think it's just like any other piece of historical data. There's going to be history that is solid history that you want to learn from and know your history. History of the Civil War, the American Revolution, whatever you want to plug into that, under that category.
Yeah, well, you see, wait a sec, hold on here.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the Civil War, you're not talking about history that's based on a myth. You're actually dealing with fact.
Right. This is where I'm going with that. You've got factual history that's important to learn, and then I think you have mythological history, or the history that is unproven history, or that stems out of mythology or spirituality or religion. And we suddenly take those things, and because they come out of a religious context, we want to write them off. We want to say, those aren't as important. That's religion. That was in a religious book, a book of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But what if these things have something that's going on? What if there is a connection to the ancient alienists? What if there is a connection to things that are happening in politics today?
But
things that are happening around the world today?
Like, if somebody believes in the Bible, no matter what your book says, they're not going to believe it.
Well, that's right. And I actually said this is like being a Republican trying to convince a Democrat that his philosophies are wrong and his ideologies are wrong. You never get anywhere with it, for the most part. So what this book does, in a sense, I've come out of conservative Christianity. When I say I was in seminary, I was in a conservative fundamentalist Baptist seminary. I was a youth minister for many years.
Okay.
And I was in ministry, and I was just imbued in this stuff. This is the stuff I'm writing about here that made me sit back and say, wait a minute. I don't know where my faith is on this stuff anymore. And I've drifted for many number of years.
There's a good question. What was it that happened to you that made you question your faith? There had to be something that happened.
I chalked it up originally, when I left the church, I chalked it up to methodologies, politics, and what I called extra-biblical teachings in the church. And I found it, I was very disillusioned with, aren't we supposed to be, as ministers, teaching the Word of God, the Bible, and yet we've got this whole grocery list of other things that we add to it because it's our interpretation. You can't go to movies. You can't listen to rock and roll music. This is when I was a kid in the 70s. You know, we're burning, our youth group would burn their record albums because, you're listening to Kiss or, they were Knights in Satan's Service. All rock music is wrong. So it's that kind of stuff. As I started getting older, where I said, wait a minute, God's not going to ask me after death if that's who I mean. He's not going to ask me if I was a Baptist. And those are the methodologies of that denomination that really drove me into looking into other things. And one of the first things I did find was this whole thing about the name of God, the Elohim, the plurality. It was one of the first things I had discovered in researching. I thought, why was I never taught this? Why is that omitted? And I think one of the problems I find with this kind of topic on the Nephilim is it's either avoided in organized religion because they either don't know enough about it, they don't know how to parse down the original languages, or it's a can of worms they don't want to open because it starts to open up the door to many other things that will start to question monotheism. It will start to question many other things. And
all right.
I always say in this.
Okay, so
I haven't thrown out the baby with the bathwater.
All right, so let me just throw this at you, okay? Because we're running out of time very fast here. Has there ever been a skeleton of one of these giants found?
No, there have been skeletons found in pictures, and there's not a single one of them. It's like finding a Bigfoot corpse.
But yet you can find the skeletons of dinosaurs that roamed the earth way before these people. So how come with the giants, the Nephilim, as with Bigfoot, as with extraterrestrials, anything that is fringe, there's never any skeleton. There's never any proof.
And that is the problem. There's not even proof that God exists. I believe that there are certain veils that are unpierceable. And I think if these Nephilim have anything to do at all with spirituality, with spirit beings, with these connections to the heavenly host and things like that, this is going to be the great difficulty. Is there's going to be things that you have to accept by almost, it takes almost as much faith to believe. When you take yourself out of the religious box, it takes as much faith to believe that these things existed as it does to not believe them.
Well, it's easier to not believe because number one, there are not that many people when you take the population of the earth compared to the number of people who actually believe in the ET connection or the mythological connection to reality. Because, in the big scheme of things, in order for people to believe other than their own religious philosophical beliefs, you need to, or remember that old commercial from Wendy's, "Where's the beef?"
Yep.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
James Kroll is our special guest. His website is www.mortalmist.com. And James, what is the connection between psi and quantum physics?
Again, it's a speculative one. There's a lot of theories as to what accounts for psi phenomenon. I think the evidence for psi is overwhelming if you really look at the statistical basis and experiments and so forth. There's a lot of speculation. Certainly, the one that jives with me the best is the notion of a multiverse. It's pretty clear when you dig into quantum physics that there is this connection between consciousness and matter. There are those who speculate that human consciousness basically forks off different universes. I know that sounds like a rather profound concept. It's not my own. Many excellent quantum physicists believe the same thing. Interestingly, if you believe the notion that consciousness forks off multiverses or copies of the universe that you're a part of, and you sort of stick with one of them, if you will, it's interesting because the way I've actually modeled this dream psi experiment is to say, well, what if you left out those cards at a particular point in time, some sequence of events forked off a different universe? Mm-hmm. What if the dreaming mind is a projection into that universe? You'd be extracting information from that space without turning over the cards in your real world. It's sort of beyond the scope of what we could talk about on the radio. There's a number of sketches and conjectures I have on the website that kind of speak to that hypothesis.
What about mortalmist.com? What can our listeners find out about that?
Mortal Mist was started up about 2 years ago. There's plenty of other lucid dreaming sites on the internet, sites that boast 10, 20,000 members. Mortal Mist is a very small, very intimate site. Right now we have about 400 members or so. It's been up and running for about 2 years. I would call it more of a mature. It's very comprehensive, very easy to sort of acclimate yourself and get some help from some more experienced lucid dreamers. The thing I would offer to your listeners is that I'm sort of heading up what we call the Research Guild, where we're proposing a number of scientific experiments that leverage lucid dreaming for the purpose of science. So I've got a call for participation for people to try the cranial electrostimulation technology for lucid dream induction. I need a lot more data and a lot more human experience in that regard to understand how effective it is. We've got some ongoing experiments with regard to psi phenomenon. I've got some conjectures of my own, and again, these are not my own conjectures, but there are certainly people who believe that dreamers or astral voyagers are connected to ghosts in some sense. I don't think it's radically far-fetched, but the question becomes, if in fact ghosts or astral voyagers or lucid dreamers, how do you detect them? And again, if you can basically induce a lucid dream where you start in real life, if you will, well, then the notion of detecting an electromagnetic field, the notion of detecting negative or positive ions in relation to the astral projector or the lucid dreamer interacting with the real world, it becomes implementable. It's a provocative question and one that we're sort of just starting to dig into.
Dr. Kroll, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a great pleasure talking to you and getting a better insight into what lucid dreaming is. I wish you much success, and if there's anything we can do to help you with your experimentation, or if you need to get a message out there, please let us know. We'll be glad to have you back on at any time.
Oh, my pleasure, Robin. Thank you very much for having me.
Good night, Doctor. Dr. James Kroll, Exonation, www.mortalmist.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as the X Zone continues, live and around the world, from our studios in beautiful, sunny, and warm Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.